There are towns in the American West where a single woman can become the quiet center of an entire community, not because she demands it, not because she performs for it, but because something in the way she moves through the world, some combination of steadiness and warmth and an almost stubborn kind of grace, makes people feel more settled just by being near her. In Harlow Creek, Montana, in the autumn of 1879, that woman was Clara Ashford. She was 24 years old, the youngest daughter of the town's postmaster. With dark chestnut hair she kept in a loose braid down her back, and brown eyes that had the particular quality of making whoever she was talking to feel that they were, in that moment, the most important person in the room. She taught the children of Harlow Creek their letters and arithmetic in the one-room schoolhouse on the edge of Birch Street, and she did it with a patience and dry humor that made even the most reluctant students come back the next day. She baked a honey pie that had won the county harvest fair 3 years running, and she was the only person in town who could calm down old Reverend Hatch when he got himself worked up over the hymn selections. Every unmarried man in Harlow Creek County had, at some point, considered the question of Clara Ashford. Most of them had done considerably more than consider. There had been formal courtships and informal ones, flowers left on the schoolhouse step, invitations to Sunday suppers that she accepted with genuine warmth and then somehow, gently, did not encourage further. A cattle rancher from the Northern Valley had ridden into town specifically to meet her, after hearing about her from a cousin, stayed 3 weeks, and ridden home again, looking considerably more philosophical than when he arrived. A banker's son from Billings had sent letters for 4 months before Clara, with characteristic kindness, wrote him back a response so honest and so gentle that he reportedly framed it and kept it on his desk as a reminder that rejection, done right, is an act of respect. Clara had declined all of them, not coldly, not with the careless cruelty of a woman who enjoyed the power of it. With the genuine, unhurried kindness of someone who simply knew the difference between affection and the particular thing she was actually waiting for. People had their theories, of course. She was too particular. She was holding out for someone from the city. She was married to her schoolroom and had no room left for anything else. A few of the older women in town whispered that she was simply afraid, which was the thing people always said about a woman who knew her own mind. None of them were right. The answer was considerably simpler than any of their theories, and considerably more inconvenient, and it had a name. The name was Seth Calloway. And Seth Calloway was the only man in Harlow Creek who had never once considered the question of Clara Ashford, not because she wasn't worth considering, but because Seth Calloway had spent so many years thinking of her as simply part of the landscape of his life, that the idea of her as something he might reach for had simply never arrived in his mind as a possibility. What no one knew, not the older women with their theories, not Clara's sister May, not even Clara herself until recently, was that the calendar was beginning to matter in a way it hadn't before. Seth Calloway was 31 years old and ran the grain mill on the east side of Harlow Creek, where the river bent and the cottonwoods grew thick in the summer. He had inherited it from his father at 22, learned it entirely on his own, and turned it into the most reliable operation in the county through the simple method of being honest about prices, delivering what he promised, and fixing things immediately when they went wrong. He was tall, a little angular, with the kind of face that looked better when he was smiling than when he was serious, and hands that always had flour dust in the creases no matter how many times he washed them. Other men in Harlow Creek called Seth dependable, which meant they trusted him completely but rarely thought about him very hard. He was the man you went to when something needed doing right. He was not the man anyone expected to surprise you. What Seth Calloway was, without any argument, was decent. Not in the visible, performed way of a man who wants credit for his decency. In the way that meant he quietly paid for the widow Pearson's mill fees 3 winters running and told his foreman it was a billing error. In the way that meant when the Harlow Creek schoolhouse roof leaked in the November rains, he showed up on a Saturday with shingles and his younger brother and had it fixed before Clara arrived Monday morning and left no note about it. He and Clara had grown up on the same 3 streets. They had known each other since they were children, chasing each other through the summer grass near the river. They had the easy, unexamined familiarity of 2 people who had been quietly woven into each other's ordinary life for so long that neither of them had thought to look at it directly. Seth looked at Clara the way you look at a river you have walked beside your whole life, aware that it is beautiful, grateful that it is there, and somehow never once stopping to consider that you could step into it. He came into the post office on a Tuesday morning in October for a parcel from his supplier in Billings and found Clara behind the counter helping her father sort the morning mail, her braid over one shoulder, reading an address on an envelope with total concentration, her lips moving slightly with the words. "Morning, Clara," he said, the way he had said it somewhere north of 1,000 times. "Morning, Seth," she said, the way she had answered, without looking up, comfortable in the way of people who don't need to perform for each other. He collected his parcel. He left. Outside on the boardwalk, Frank Delaney refused by Clara once, philosophical about it within a month. Now, a reasonably contented married man with 2 children, watched Seth walk out and shook his head with the slow, sorrowful patience of a man watching someone walk past a gold coin on the ground. "You know," Frank said, falling into step beside him for a moment, "for a man who operates a mill, you have an unusual talent for not seeing what's right in front of you." Seth looked at him with genuine puzzlement. "What does that mean?" Frank looked at the sky. "Nothing at all," he said. "Absolutely nothing," and turned down the side street toward his hardware store, already thinking about something else. But Frank was thinking about something Seth didn't know yet. Because Harlow Creek had received a visitor 3 weeks ago, and the visitor had not left. His name was Douglas Hale. He was 43, a land commissioner from the territorial government, broad through the shoulders, with the confident, unhurried bearing of a man who had learned early that authority was mostly a matter of acting like you already had it. He had come to Harlow Creek to assess the county's land records and negotiate a right-of-way agreement for the railroad that was moving steadily westward. And he was, by any measure, the most consequential visitor the town had received in years. He stayed at the Harlow Creek Hotel. He ate dinner at the same table every evening. He had already met with the mayor and the 3 largest landowners. And for the past 2 weeks, he had been stopping at the schoolhouse at the end of the day. At first, Clara had thought he was interested in the school for professional reasons. The territorial government had jurisdiction over rural education, and it was not unusual for officials to inspect the schoolrooms. But Douglas Hale was not inspecting the schoolroom. Douglas Hale was waiting for the children to go home. He was polite. He was interesting. He had seen more of the world than anyone else in Harlow Creek, and talked about it without condescension, which was a skill Clara genuinely appreciated. He was also, she noticed, watching her with the careful, measuring attention of a man who had decided something and was working out the details. He asked her to take a walk along the river one Saturday afternoon. She accepted, because refusing would have required more explanation than she wanted to give, and because some part of her was genuinely curious about a man that different from the men she already knew. He was a good conversationalist. He was also, she realized within the first quarter mile, not asking questions so much as conducting an assessment. Not unkindly, just deliberately. The way a man moves when he has already made up his mind and is simply confirming the decision. On the walk home, when the cottonwoods were turning and the river was low and silver in the afternoon light, Douglas Hale said, in the direct and settled way of a man who rarely repeated himself, that he intended to return to Harlow Creek in the spring, and that he would very much like to know whether she might be open to a serious conversation about her future at that time. Clara said she would think about it. She thought about it for exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, she was in the schoolroom after the children had gone, erasing the arithmetic problems from the board, when Seth appeared in the doorway with the split piece of window molding he had promised to fix 2 weeks ago. He knocked on the frame, held up the molding, and said, "Tuesday, all right?" Meaning the repair. "Tuesday is fine," she said. He nodded. He started to leave. "Seth," she said. He stopped. She looked at him in the late afternoon light, this man she had known her entire life, standing in the doorway of her schoolroom with wood dust on his coat and flowers still on his right hand, and that particular way he had of occupying a space without demanding anything from it. She wanted to say something true. She wasn't sure yet what it was, or whether she had the right to say it, or whether saying it would matter. So she said only, "Thank you," for the roof in November. He looked surprised that she knew. "It needed doing," he said. "It did," she agreed. "It was kind of you." He nodded again, a little uncomfortably the way he always was when someone thanked him for something, and left. Clara turned back to the chalkboard. She erased the last equation. The chalk dust settled, and she understood, in the quiet way that you understand things you have been keeping just below the surface of knowing, that she was not going to think about Douglas Hale's offer very much longer. Because the answer was already there, and it had been there for a long time, and its name was not Douglas Hale. The difficulty was that the answer did not appear to know it was the answer. May Ashford was 27, 2 years older than Clara, married to a good-humored cattleman named Robert, and constitutionally incapable of letting important things go unaddressed. She arrived at Clara's house on a Thursday evening with a pot of soup and an expression that meant she had been sitting on something for a while. They ate. May talked about Robert and the cattle and the neighbor's fence that had been falling over since June. And then, when the soup was mostly gone, May set down her spoon and looked at her sister directly. "Douglas Hale is going to make a formal offer," she said. Robert heard it from the hotel owner, who heard it from Hale's associate. "He's planning to come back in March and ask you properly." Clara was quiet. "He's a serious man," May said carefully. "Good standing, steady income. He's seen the world." A pause. "I'm not telling you what to do." "I know," Clara said. "I'm telling you because you should know." May looked at her. "And because I've been watching you for about 3 years now, and I think you already know what you want, and I think the problem is that what you want doesn't know you want it." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He looks at me like I'm part of the furniture," she said finally. "Pleasant, familiar, always there. He'd notice if I were gone the same way. He'd notice if the river moved briefly, and then he'd adjust." "That's not what I see," May said. "You see what you want to see. You've always wanted us to end up neighbors." May smiled, but her eyes were serious. "How long are you going to wait?" Clara looked out the window at the dark street. "I don't know," she said, which was honest, because the truth was that she had been asking herself that same question with increasing frequency, and the answer kept changing on her. "Spring is coming," May said quietly. "March is not very far." Clara knew. That was exactly the problem. It was Frank Delaney who finally said something, and he said it on a gray November morning when Seth came in to pick up nails for a repair at the mill. Frank had a gift for timing. He waited until he had counted out the nails into the paper bag, folded the top, set it on the counter, and then said, without looking up, "Douglas Hale is coming back in March. Word is he's going to ask Clara formally." Seth's hand stopped on the bag. "Where did you hear that?" he said. "From Robert Ashford, who heard it from May, who heard it from Clara herself." Frank finally looked up. "I'm telling you as a friend, Seth, and as a friend, I am saying this as plainly as I know how." He leaned on the counter. "Clara Ashford has said no to every man who has come through this town for the better part of 4 years. There is a reason for that. I know the reason. You know the reason. The only person in Harlow Creek who appears not to know the reason is currently standing in my hardware store holding a bag of nails." The store was quiet. A gust of wind moved down the street outside. Seth looked at Frank for a long moment. "She wouldn't," he started. "She has been," Frank said simply, "for years. And Douglas Hale doesn't know that. And he is a serious man with serious intentions. And March is 4 months away. And if you spend those 4 months the way you have spent the last 4 years, you are going to stand in that church watching a woman you love marry someone who actually had the courage to ask." Seth said nothing. Frank picked up a rag and began wiping down the counter, because he had said what he came to say, and was not a man who believed in repeating himself. Seth took his bag of nails. He walked back to the mill. He stood at the window that looked out over the river for a long time, the bag still in his hand, thinking about the particular quality of Tuesday mornings when Clara came to pick up her father's grain order, and the way she laughed at something that wasn't quite a joke yet, and the walk along Birch Street last winter when she had been telling him about one of her students and had grabbed his arm without thinking in the middle of the story and then let go again the same way, naturally, like it was simply what you did when you were talking to someone who mattered. He thought about Douglas Hale, whom he had seen at dinner at the hotel and found perfectly reasonable and had not particularly liked, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. He thought about March. He set the nails down on the work table very carefully, like a man who has understood something and is not quite sure what to do with the understanding. The repair to the schoolroom window molding happened on a Tuesday, as agreed. Seth arrived with his tools and the correct piece of lumber and fixed the molding in 40 minutes with the quiet efficiency of a man who is good at the work he does. Clara was teaching. He worked around the lesson without disturbing it. He heard her explain long division to a 9-year-old with a patience and a humor that made even the arithmetic seem like it had a personality, and he found himself pausing more than once and then remembering he was supposed to be fixing a window. When the children were dismissed and the schoolroom emptied, Clara was erasing the board again. He gathered his tools. He should leave. He stayed. "Clara," he said. She turned. He was standing with his toolbox in his hand and the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed something and lost the rehearsal. "I heard about Hale," he said. She went still. Not surprised. Exactly. Just still. "I don't have any right to bring it up," he said. "I know that. I have spent a significant amount of time not having any right to anything because I never said the thing that would have given me the right." He set the toolbox down because he needed his hands to be empty for this. "But I need to tell you something before March. Before you make a decision about your life that doesn't need to go the direction it might go." The schoolroom was quiet around them. The fire in the small stove, the smell of chalk and wood smoke. "I've been watching you for years," he said, "and I don't mean that in the way it sounds. I mean, I've been part of your life in the way furniture is part of a room present, familiar, and somehow never quite registering what that means." He looked at her directly, the way he rarely did, the way he did when he was about to say something he would not take back. "I think I have loved you for a long time and simply not had the sense to name it. That's not something I'm proud of, but I need you to know it now, before I spend the rest of my life knowing I had the chance to say it and didn't." Clara looked at him. "I'm not asking you to do anything with it," he said. "I'm just asking you not to make a decision about your future without knowing that there is a man who has been standing beside your life for years, like an idiot who cannot read a map, and who has finally, very belatedly, figured out where he is." The fire crackled in the stove. A horse went past on the street outside. Clara looked at Seth Calloway, who was standing in her schoolroom with flour dust on his coat, and the look of a man who had just said the truest thing he had ever said in his life and was not sure what would happen next. "Seth," she said. "Yes, you fixed my roof in November and didn't tell me. It needed doing. You have paid for the widow Pearson's mill fees for 3 years and told everyone it was a billing error." He looked startled. "How do you know about that?" "She told me. Last spring. She didn't think you'd mind her telling me." Clara took one step toward him. "You return lost things. You remember what people tell you. You show up when things need fixing and leave before anyone has to thank you." She looked at him steadily. "I have been watching you do all of that for 4 years, Seth Calloway, and waiting for you to turn around and see that I was watching." The fire crackled. "I'm not waiting anymore," she said quietly. "I've done enough of that. So I need you to decide right now whether you mean what you just said, or whether you said it because Douglas Hale coming back in March made it suddenly feel urgent. Because I am not interested in being a decision someone makes because a calendar scared them." Seth looked at her. "It wasn't the calendar," he said. "The calendar just made me stop pretending I didn't already know." Clara studied him for a moment with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. Then she said, "All right." Just that. "All right." 2 words that somehow held everything. "Before we go on, I want to know where in the world you're listening from today. Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments. It means more than you know to understand where this story is reaching. Now, let's go back to Harlow Creek, because Seth Calloway has a few things left to do. He came to the post office the next morning. He was wearing his good shirt. He had combed his hair. He had the look of a man who had made up his mind the night before and was not going to unmake it. Harold Ashford was behind the counter sorting the morning mail, which he had done every morning for 22 years, and showed no signs of stopping. He looked at Seth. He looked at the shirt. He looked at the expression. He said nothing for a moment. Then he called toward the back room. "Clara, Seth Calloway is here." Footsteps. A pause. Then she came through the door. And the look she gave Seth was direct and clear, and entirely without the careful, measured patience she had been carrying around for years. It was simply, "You came." "I'd like your father's permission to call on you," Seth said, looking at Harold. Harold Ashford set down the mail very deliberately. "You have it," he said. Then he picked the mail back up and became extremely interested in the return address on a package from Billings. Clara looked at Seth. "Most men who come calling," she said, "bring something." Seth looked at his empty hands. He had forgotten. He had thought of nothing but getting here. "I'll bring something tomorrow." "What will you bring?" He thought about it seriously, the way he considered things. "There are wild asters still flowering along the north bend of the river," he said. "Purple ones. I can have them here before you open." She looked at him. "And after that?" "Whatever you need," he said. "For as long as you want it." Clara Ashford, who had waited 4 years for this conversation, allowed herself exactly one moment of feeling the full weight of that. Then she said, "Don't be late." What followed was the most closely observed courtship in recent Harlow Creek memory. He brought the asters the next morning, bundled in a piece of brown paper, left on the post office step before dawn. Clara put them in a glass jar on the schoolhouse windowsill where the children could see them, and told exactly no one where they had come from, which caused immediate and sustained speculation among the mothers of Harlow Creek. He came to Sunday dinner at the Ashfords. Harold was warm. May arrived uninvited with a second pie and a barely concealed expression of victory that she deployed against no one in particular. Clara sat across from Seth, and they talked the way they always had, easily, with the particular dry humor that had always been comfortable between them, except that now neither of them was pretending it was simply neighborly. Douglas Hale, it turned out, was the kind of man who, when a situation became clear about it himself without requiring anyone to explain. He stopped at the schoolhouse one last time in late November, hat in hand, and said with the direct courtesy of a man who respected plain dealing that he understood the landscape had changed and wished her well. Clara thanked him genuinely. He left Harlow Creek the following week and did not return. On a Sunday afternoon in December, Seth and Clara walked out to the North Ridge where you could see the full valley spread below, the river silver and low, the mountains to the west, showing their first real snow on the high peaks. The cottonwoods bare now and beautiful in a different way. They sat in the cold, clear light and talked about real things. "Why did you wait?" he asked. Not accusingly, genuinely, in the way of a man trying to understand something he had been slow to see. "Because you were worth it," she said. "And because I kept thinking you'd figure it out on your own. I almost didn't." I know." She looked at the valley. "That's the part that frightens me, if I'm honest. Not that you didn't see it sooner, but that I might have made a different choice before you did." He was quiet. "Hale is a good man," Seth said. "He is. You would have been." "Seth." She turned to look at him with the full, direct attention she gave to things that required honesty. "I would have been fine. That is not the same as what this is." She held his gaze. "Don't confuse fine with right." He looked at her. This woman who had held something patiently for 4 years and offered it to him without conditions and without resentment, which was a generosity he understood he had not earned and intended to spend the rest of his life being worth. The valley was silver and gold below them. The mountains were doing what they always did, and something that had been moving quietly toward this moment for a very long time finally arrived and sat down in the cold December air and understood that it did not have to go anywhere else. He asked her in February, on the steps of the schoolhouse after the last student had gone home, in the thin, pale light of a winter afternoon. He had his grandmother's ring in his coat pocket, a simple gold band with a small garnet that he had cleaned with careful attention and carried for 3 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt genuine rather than arranged. He had rehearsed something. He had lost the rehearsal, which was beginning to seem inevitable when it came to her. "Clara, he said. "I need to say something plainly, because I have spent a considerable amount of time being unclear, and you deserve better than that." She looked at him, those brown eyes, steady in the pale winter light. "I love you," he said. "I am relatively certain I have loved you for years, which is not a point in my favor, but I know it now with the same certainty. I know the things I'm most sure of, which are mostly practical things, so I realize this is a strange context for certainty, but there it is." He paused. "I would like very much for you to be my wife. If you are willing to take on a man who was slow and is intending to make up for it." Clara looked at him for a moment. "Seth Calloway," she said, "that is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard. I know I had something better prepared and lost it." "What did you lose?" "Something about the river," he said, "and the cottonwoods. It was considerably more poetic." "And yet you forgot it." "I was nervous," he said. "I have never done this before." Clara looked at him. At this man standing on her schoolhouse steps in the February cold with his grandmother's ring in his pocket and flour dust on his coat, and the particular expression of someone who has finally, completely arrived somewhere. "Yes," she said, simply. After 4 years of waiting, the word that had always been ready. "Yes." He put the ring on her finger in the thin February light, and she looked at it the way you look at something that has been yours for a long time and is only now officially acknowledged. They were married in April, when the cottonwoods were beginning to green and the asters were not yet blooming, but the river was high and loud with the snowmelt from the mountains. The whole town came, May cried, which she had claimed she would not do. Harold Ashford shook Seth's hand for a long time without saying anything, which said everything. Frank Delaney stood in the fourth pew with the serene satisfaction of a man who has watched something he invested in pay off. Clara walked toward Seth in her mother's dress, altered at the waist, with the unhurried certainty of a woman arriving somewhere she had always been headed. Seth watched her come and felt, with sudden and total clarity, what 4 years of being a fool had almost cost him. How a man could walk beside something extraordinary every day of his life and simply not see it. How Douglas Hale had almost made his offer. How 1 more month of his own comfortable blindness might have changed everything permanently. He was not going to take another day of it for granted. The years that followed were good ones, built from honest work and the particular warmth of 2 people who genuinely liked each other and found, as the years went on, that they liked each other more rather than less, which is the thing that matters and is rarer than people say. The mill grew. Clara kept the accounts during the winter months and discovered in the first year that Seth had been absorbing losses on 3 accounts, out of what she could only describe as a form of loyalty that he had not mentioned. She did not correct this, because she recognized it for what it was. She simply restructured the account so that the kindness was more sustainable, which Seth accepted without argument, because he had learned quickly that on matters of numbers and cents, Clara was simply right. Their daughter arrived in the 2nd year. They named her Ruth, for Seth's grandmother whose ring Clara wore. She had her father's patience and her mother's eyes and a temperament so cheerful that even the hard Montana winters seemed to agree with her. Their son came in the 4th year. They named him James. He was loud and curious and interested in everything, and had the particular gift of making everyone around him feel that whatever they were doing was the most interesting thing happening in the world, which he had learned, without knowing it, from watching his mother teach. On a spring evening in their 7th year, Clara was in the yard hanging the washing when Seth came through the gate from the mill, still dusty from the day, and stopped at the fence to watch her. She was humming. She always hummed at the repetitive work. The light was coming off the river, that particular gold it gets in Montana in May, and the mountains to the west were green up to the timberline, and the cottonwoods along the fence were loud with the first birds. She felt him there before she saw him. Turned. "You're staring," she said. "I know. You used to never stare. I used to not know what I was looking at." He came through the gate. "I've corrected that." She smiled. The real one. His. He crossed the yard and took the laundry basket from her hands and set it on the ground and held her in the gold evening light, and she rested her head against his chest. From inside the house came Ruth's voice and James's voice, arguing about something with the absolute conviction of children who have been told they are both right and have not believed it. Seth held his wife in the evening light and thought about Frank Delaney in the hardware store and that bag of nails and the 4 years he had spent walking past something extraordinary. He thought about Douglas Hale, somewhere in the territory, doing whatever serious men with good intentions did when the thing they wanted turned out to already belong to someone else, even if that someone else hadn't known it yet. He thought about how close it had all come to going differently. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. "I see you," he said, quiet enough that it was only for her. "I should have said it years ago, but I see you." She didn't ask what he meant. She had always known what he meant. She had simply been waiting for him to arrive at it. Years later, when Ruth was old enough to ask and curious enough to push past the polished version of the story, she asked her mother the real question. They were in the kitchen, Ruth learning to make the honey pie that had become something of a Calloway family institution. And the question came the way honest questions do sideways, in the middle of something practical. How did you know Papa was worth waiting for? Before he knew himself, I mean. Clara was quiet for a moment, working the pastry. "He never showed off," she said finally. "Every other man who came along was trying to show me something, his land, his position, what he could provide. Your father just showed up, the same every time whether I was watching or not." A pause. That's how you know who someone is. You watch what they do when they're not performing. Ruth thought about this. "But you almost didn't wait, because of Mr. Hale." Clara looked at her daughter, Seth's patience in that face, her own eyes. "Yes," she said. "Almost." She handed Ruth the rolling pin. "That's the part I want you to remember, not the happy ending." The almost. Ruth looked at her. "Know your own mind," Clara said. "Don't perform for anyone. If the person you want is slow to see it, you can give them time, but not forever. At some point, you say the true thing. You give them the chance to show up." She smoothed the edge of the pastry with her thumb. "And if they don't show up after that, you have your answer, and you move forward." "But Ruth," she looked at her daughter. "In my experience, when you say the true thing to the right person, they show up." Clara Ashford Calloway had not waited passively. She had lived fully while she waited, which is the only kind of waiting that doesn't cost you something. She had shown up every day as exactly herself, without performing, without diminishing, without making herself smaller or easier or more available than she actually was. And when she understood that the calendar was no longer on her side, she did not panic. She simply told the truth on a Tuesday afternoon in a schoolroom full of chalk dust and let it land where it would. That took more courage than Seth's speech on the schoolhouse steps. That took more courage than most people will give her credit for. And Seth is not a villain in this story. He is something far more recognizable. A man so accustomed to the presence of something wonderful that he had stopped seeing it. A man so convinced, without ever thinking about it directly, that the most extraordinary thing in his daily life was simply part of the scenery, available and constant and not requiring any particular action on his part. Until Frank Delaney said Douglas Hale's name in a hardware store. Until the clock that had been running quietly became suddenly, undeniably loud. Sometimes that is what it takes. Not the arrival of love that was already there, had been there for years, patient and steady as the river outside the mill, but the understanding that love, like the river in a dry summer, does not simply stay at full level forever just because it always has before. They chose each other deliberately, at the last possible moment that still counted as in time. That is the part worth holding on to. Thank you for listening today. Wherever you are, I am grateful you were here. Until next time. Sometimes the people most worth loving are the ones we stop truly seeing, not out of cruelty, but out of comfort. Clara never made herself smaller to be noticed, and Seth never looked harder because he assumed she'd always be there. What finally moved them wasn't magic, it was honesty, spoken plainly, before time ran out. Say the true thing to the right person. They tend to show up. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment, and to leave behind something quietly useful. A little reminder that the best things in our lives sometimes just need us to finally turn around and see them.